Hi, my name is David Kelley, and I'm from the AGI lab, and I wanted to go over my paper, the AGI Protocol for the Ethical Treatment of Artificial General Intelligence Systems. And I guess to start, there's a lot of background as to why we went and developed a laboratory protocol like this, but let me just go over the abstract from the paper. The AGI protocol is a laboratory process for the assessment and ethical treatment of artificial general intelligence systems that could be conscious and have subjective emotional experiences theoretically. It's meant for looking at systems that could have emotional subjective experience, much like a human, even if only from that theoretical standpoint. It's not to say that other ethical concerns do not also need to be addressed, but this protocol is designed to focus on how we treat such a system in the lab. Other ethical concerns are out of scope, at least for the context of this paper, and the protocol is designed to provide a basis for working with those systems, especially those that are modeled after the human mind, in terms of emotional subjective experience from a theoretical standpoint. If you're not familiar with our work, a lot of the stuff we've been doing is about systems that have emotional subjective experience, and we've had to create a lot of assumptions and other kind of a framework so we have a foundation to build on, and you're welcome to check that research out. But for this particular paper, we created this protocol as part of a process for how we ethically consider teaching systems or training systems or treat them, and then it gets into the whole safety thing. AGI system could theoretically destroy humanity, and there's a lot of concerns out in the industry right now around the dangers of AI and the existential risk, and so we got into this conversation with David Sontag, and in an email he sent to Ben Goertzel and myself around lab protocols, something to do with a project in Japan they were working on. And so we as a team got together and thought about, well, how would we containerize these different considerations? How do we consider safety from humanity's standpoint? We don't want to have Terminators running around, or even just biases that hurt humans for unfair reasons. At the same time, if we're going to treat, create an AGI that's sapient and self-aware, we would like it to be able to do as we do, and in that means, not putting humanity first, but putting something that the AGI and humanity can hold on to, that's also compatible with what we experience in our world now. And so that was really why the AGI protocol came about, and we decided to break it up into specific protocols. One about how we treat systems, and then another around containment and safety. And so we have these different protocols that we're working on. This paper is about what we're calling Protocol 1, or how we treat systems. So when you start talking about human safety or other ethical considerations, those are really important, but not really the subject of Protocol 1, specifically this paper. So that's kind of the background for how this protocol was developed. In terms of how we developed the protocol itself, we really came down to how do we measure, or how do we create objective measures. If you look at medical science and how you determine if a human is conscious, it's very subjective, and it's very tied to humans, right? And now we're talking about a system that's not human, and we did an initial draft that we ended up throwing out that was more based on some of the processes we use with humans from the medical industry, and it turned out to just be too wildly suggestive and easily fooled, and there were just all kinds of operational problems with that. And so there was a lot of different iterations. I think the actual iteration of the paper that ended up being submitted to BICA is like the 11th iteration or something like that. And so Kierton and myself and others from our team kind of really hashed this out over and over and over and over again. So let me go over the Protocol 1 procedures. So step 1 is really understanding the cognitive model you're talking about. Making sure you have a cognitive model that hasn't been disproven in some way, meaning does that cognitive model support this idea of subjective emotional experience? If a system is designed in such a way where it doesn't experience pain and suffering, or it's not really conscious or self-aware, even at a theoretical level, why are you bothering with this protocol? It doesn't even apply. So step 1 is just to understand the cognitive model that you're talking about for the entity that you wanted to theoretically test, as the system is designed to apply to humans and AGI systems equally well, and that was kind of a key design constraint. Step 2 is what we call the threshold test. So the threshold test really gets back to a ethical model that we designed that is compatible with most human ethical models, but at the same time removes the subjectivity to it. And so in that model, instead of placing humanity or something like that as the center or foundation of that ethical model, we're talking about placing sapient sentient intelligence at a certain level. So there's this idea of a threshold, and being able to identify the threshold in which a system could theoretically understand itself and its environment enough to re-engineer itself from scratch. And that doesn't mean, like, if you were applying this to a person, going out and reproducing sexually is not going to cut it. Or if you're a computer program doing a copy, that's not what I mean. To be able to cross a threshold would be able to go into a lab, sit down at a computer, and or in some other closed environment like that, and re-engineer yourself from the ground up. You know, with humanity, for example, that's a really high bar. We're just barely, as a species, getting to the point where we can talk about artificial wombs and re-engineering DNA from scratch and this kind of stuff, and not be just it become completely nonsense. We could theoretically do it at this point, and so we meet that threshold, so that we're holding all systems in this procedure or this protocol to that bar, this SSIVA threshold. So step 2, if a system could theoretically meet that threshold, it can go on, independent of other entities. Step 3 is a set of sub-criteria for research considerations, and I wanted to be more precise there, so I printed it out on my little sheet here. So step 3 is understanding if the knowledge gained is necessary for this kind of system, if we are to improve the system, especially as it relates to safety of other beings. This could be additional ethical considerations. I know that we tried to isolate that, but in this case, we do kind of need to think about that, we felt, even within the confines of this specific protocol. Step 2 of the steps for step 3, there's no other model or mode of research that will give us the knowledge we need. And 3, the systems used in the proposed research study must be maintained in either an ethologically physical or social environment, or in the system's designed natural habitat via our other environment. So if we design some AGI agent and it's designed to live in this VR environment, we're not going to, torture it and kill it and throw it out the back. If this system really theoretically is able to meet all of these bars and pass the SSIVA threshold and has a solid cognitive model and all that kind of stuff, what we're saying is it's unethical to really torture something like that and then just toss it aside. Step 4 then, and the last step of the protocol, is really about informed consent. You know, if I'm going to go pick someone off the street and, you know, do horrible medical experiments on them, I'm going to want to get their permission. You know, it would be unethical to just take someone and do that. And if you're really talking about an AGI that's met all of these other criteria, do you really want to go doing this without their permission? So the idea of this protocol is we're treating the systems with respect once they've meet these various bars. So in the paper, there's this matrix that you can go down, and in the paper it gives two examples. One specific to the MASI iteration of ICOM, which is a system that we've been designing, and one Sophia, the robot that you may have seen on YouTube. Now, Sophia does have elements. There's OpenCog in the back end, and so there's some basis or argument you could make that you could possibly apply the AGI protocol or Protocol 1 to that research. And so we used our own matrix and filled out that matrix for Sophia and for our MASI. And in the paper, we found that the MASI does meet the criteria, at least from a theoretical standpoint, where Sophia, because it's a little more scripted than I know they publicly really talk about, it doesn't really meet the criteria. So from the AGI Protocol 1 standpoint, doing research on Sophia, no problem. Doing research on the MASI could potentially be problematic from an ethical standpoint. Now, we would argue that that's still theoretical. So we haven't really proven the point that it's sufficiently sophisticated to cross the SSIV threshold independently. So I would argue from that standpoint, it's perfectly fine to do whatever we want with MASI, but it's a little bit more of a fine line. But those are the examples used in the paper. And for us, you know, in terms of next steps with these procedures, as we do research around designing systems that have subjective experience, we're really talking about developing multiple procedures. So like Protocol 2, which is kind of built on this line of thinking, is around containment, and then Protocol 3, safety implications, and so forth. And those papers are not ready yet, but next year sometime probably. And feel free to ping us. We were going to make some of this stuff all publicly available, and so people can use them, and of course send it to Dr. Sontag, the one with their project in Japan, that I know they wanted to have something like this for their work with some kind of human brain related project. And that's it. That's our paper. Feel free to send me comments, and thank you for checking out BICA.